let us talk about tissues, and eventually we're going to talk about skin. Welcome to Unit 4. Again, helpful videos. So, going back to our organization of the body from smallest to largest, we have been talking about cells and fluids. So, a couple factoids to keep in mind. We are made up of 100 trillion different cells. That being said, no cell can carry out all of the necessary functions of a body, let alone a system, by itself. So, similar cells are going to aggregate into what we call, tissues. Tissues are collections of cells with a similar structure and function, and the study of those tissues is known as histology. The study of the cells themselves, though, is referred to as cytology. Now, tissues are divided into 4 main categories. We are actually going to start off this first audio with the epithelial tissue type. Epithelial tissues tend to be the covering and lining category. Second major category is connective tissues. Those tend to be involved in support. And then we have muscles, which are movement, and nervous, which is control. We're actually not going to spend too much time on muscle and nerve because we talk about those more when we talk about the systems, the very specific systems those are involved in, the skeletal or the muscular system and the nervous system, but we will touch on that. So something I want you to do is pause this real quick, take a look at these images, and which tissues do you believe belongs with which picture? Is this 1, 2, 3, or 4? 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 If you said that this is 2, you'd be correct. This is 3, this is 4, and this is 1. We'll talk about why. So epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissues are going to cover the surface of the body. Think your skin. They're also going to line your body cavities, so those serous membranes we talked about. It's also going to form the external and internal linings of most organs. So when we talk about endothelial linings, it's epithelial tissue. And they're going to be what make up the bulk of most of your glands. Why do they make up the bulk of most of your glands? Because epithelial tissue cells are involved in the secretion of substances. Now they also, obviously, because we're talking skin, going to be involved in protection. They're going to be involved in sensory reception. They're going to be involved in absorption. Think the lining of your small intestine. And they're going to be involved in filtration. Nephrons of the kidneys. Which means epithelial tissue is one of the most common tissue types and can be found everywhere in the body. Right. So, some characteristics. Epithelial tissue is composed of sheets of close-packed cells. They don't tend to find a lot of extracellular material, so material outside of the cell. We're going to have a lot of artistic renderings like this one here, as well as microscope imaging. What connects these epithelial cells together? They're going to be connected via 2 major structures, tight junctions and desmosomes. Tight junctions are going to be literal, think of them as adhesions based or glue. Substances that bind them next to each other so that nothing can get through and they have a hard time being pulled apart. And desmosomes are similar. Different areas of a epithelial cell are going to have different structures and therefore they're going to have different functions potentially. We tend to, because they tend to line things, tend to say they have an apical side and a basal side. The apical side is typically the side of the cell that is exposed to a cavity or the exterior, while the basal side is what's going to be attached to what we call a basal membrane or a basement membrane. This is a connective tissue supportive membrane that these cells are anchored to. Epithelial tissue is avascular. You might be going, whoa, no, it's not. I cut my skin, I bleed. Do you always, though? You get a splinter in your skin, just underneath the top layer. Do you bleed? Get a paper cut, hurts like a son of a gun. But does it always bleed? You have to get deeper through the layers before you hit a blood vessel. That's because it's avascular. Despite it being avascular, it is or does have a high capacity to regenerate. Why is that a good thing? Well, think about that paper cut. Think about that splinter. Think about your skin and all that it's exposed to. We're maybe eventually finally starting to get into the summer where people get sunburns. Windburns are always a thing around here. You typically heal really quickly from scrapes and cuts and bumps and minor burns. Why is that? The skin easily and quickly regenerates. Now, the name or how we classify epithelial cells is based on the number of layers and the shape of the cells themselves. So, starting from the layers. If they are one-layered, they're called simple. If they're multi-layered, they're stratified. Nice and easy. And we put this together with the cell shape. If they're flat, scale-like, some people refer to them almost as pancake-like, those are called squamous cells. If they're cuboidal or cube-shaped, they're referred to as, if they're cube-shaped, they're cuboidal. And if they're more like columns or rectangles, they're called columnar. And you put them together like this. Simple squamous epithelium, stratified squamous epithelium, simple cuboidal epithelium, stratified cuboidal epithelium. You see where I'm going with this? You basically take the number of layers and the shape name, and that's the name of the tissue. Nice and easy. There are 6 main types. There are 2 others that we'll talk about eventually. It's called transitional epithelium and pseudostratified columnar epithelium. We'll talk about why those are special and unique. Simple squamous epithelium is a single layer of flattened cells. They are going to be very thin, but tough to see through, despite them being thin. This is going to be involved with diffusion and filtration, so we're going to find them in places where we want to reduce friction, and we want to have a lot of diffusion and filtration. So places like the lining of the lymphatic and cardiovascular systems, the lining of ducts, the lining of the nephrons, air sacs of the lungs, lining of the heart and blood vessels, that's when we call it endothelium. If it's the external lining of visceral organs, we're going to call it mesothelium. What is its function? That thinness allows for materials to rapidly diffuse or be transported through the layer, which means it's great for oxygen and CO2 exchange. Oxygen to come out of the alveolar sacs and CO2 to go in. Or at the other end of it, oxygen to leave the bloodstream and CO2 to go in. Now there's a question down here, a couple questions down here. Take a moment, pause it, think about these. Think of these, anytime you see these sorts of questions, these are critical thinking questions, learning questions. If you can answer these questions, you understand innately the material. That innate understanding will really come in handy later on down the road. Moving to simple cuboidal, simple, single layer of square or round cells. Where do we tend to find these? Well, a couple of other unique things. The apical or outer edge tends to have microvilli. What are microvilli? They're small extensions of the cell membrane. What's their purpose? They increase the surface area. Increased surface area involves increased secretion and absorption. Why would we want that? Why would we want to increase specifically absorption? And how does it do that? So where do we find these places we want that? Places like the liver, pancreas, thyroid, salivary, and other glands. Kidney tubules, bronchioles. Bronchioles are the small tubes within the lungs right before we hit the alveoli. So in the kidneys, they're going to be involved with absorbing. In the kidney tubules, though, they're also involved with secretion. The liver, secretion. Pancreas, secretion. Thyroid, salivary, pituitary, secretion. Liver is also absorption too. Simple columnar, a single layer of tall, narrow cells with a typically oval-shaped nucleus that is vertically oriented. If they are secretory in nature, they're going to have those vesicles near the apical portion of the cell. We can have microvilli. We can have cilia. What are cilia? Remember, cilia are hair-like extensions that sweep and move material over the cells. And they do come in a specialized format. The specialized format is typically referred to as a goblet cell, and goblet cells secrete mucus. Why do we like mucus? Mucus traps things. Mucus protects. Mucus is going to be the protective mechanism and why your stomach acid doesn't eat a hole through your stomach under normal circumstances. So it should make sense that simple columnar epithelium is found as the inner lining of the stomach, intestines, and rectum. It's the inner lining of the gallbladder and the inner lining of the uterus and uterine tubes. So what does it do? It absorbs and secretes, especially when found in the small intestine. Those microvilli that are found on the surface are integral into making sure we absorb all the nutrition from the food that you eat. If they are ciliated, they're going to be found to propel mucus, so lining your bronchi or lining your uterine tubes, also known as fallopian tubes, depending on your textbook, to move the fertilized or unfertilized egg down the fallopian tube. Secretion of mucus, so anywhere we need lubrication, anywhere we need to trap debris. We have stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified squamous epithelium is multiple layers of flattened cells. Specifically, if we're talking about its primary place, which is the skin, as they get more towards the outer layer, they become flatter and flatter and flatter. As they become more towards the outer layer, they become what we refer to as keratinized or packed full of a tough protein called keratin and lacking a nuclei. They are dead. The ones that are further in, closer to that basement membrane, are the cells that are actually going to divide and duplicate and replicate themselves, pushing the older cells up towards the surface where they slowly die and become full of this keratin. Those cells, the ones close to the basement membrane, are referred to as non-keratinized because they're not dead and they're not packed full of protein. Now, we can find some non-keratinized formats in places other than the skin, specifically lining the oral cavity, aka your mouth, and the surface of your tongue. These guys will also line the esophagus as well as the lining of the vagina and anal canal. Can you tell which is keratinized and which is not? If you guess that this is the non-keratinized, the one on the right, you would be correct. This keratin, this protein, really picks up dyes. Why do we care about keratinized, aka dry epithelium? It is protection. It protects against mechanical abrasion, it protects against water loss, and it helps prevent pathogens from entering. Keratin as a protein is very, very strong. It's waterproof, and it is what we refer to as bacteriostatic, meaning it helps prevent bacteria from reproducing because it doesn't have what they need. It doesn't have nutrients or environments that they need. Keratin is also found in places like your hair and your nails. Now, non-keratinized is also referred to as wet epithelium. It also is going to protect from mechanical abrasion, but it's also, because of its more wet nature, going to help move things along. Think of eating food, swallowing, sex, birth, going to the bathroom. Stratified cuboidal, multiple layers of cube-shaped cells. Typically, this is going to be sweat glands and your ovarian follicle. The ovarian follicle are cells that surround a developing egg. So what do? They're going to be involved in sweat secretion and secretion of ovarian hormones, depending on which location they are found in. Stratified columnar epithelium, 2 or more layers of rectangular cells. Very, very rare. You have some small sections in the anal canal, in your pharynx, in the epiglottis, and the male, but not female, urethra. Occasionally, we will see it in large ducts of the sweat and salivary glands. What's its function? Well, here's the thing. We typically see it when 2 tissue types meet, 2 other tissue types. So as far as we can tell, it's a kind of a glue. It also seems to lend structural integrity to gland ducts. Welcome to the human body. We don't know everything. Even things that people are like, oh yeah, no, we've known that for years. We know everything. No, we don't. No, we don't. We are constantly discovering new things in all of the systems, in all of the layers. It's a never-ending discovery. This is why treating the human is so complicated. All right, I mentioned specialized. Pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Why is it called this? Based on its name, columnar, they're rectangular in shape, but pseudo-stratified. Stratified, is layers, but what's pseudo? For my med-term students, you guys hopefully remember pseudo means false. Pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium looks like it is layered, but it is not. It's actually a single layer of column cells, and that all of the cells are attached to the basement membrane. And the reason it looks pseudo-stratified is because of the nuclei. Not all the nuclei will be towards the bottom, some will be towards the top. Some cells will be taller than others. And so it will have this very varied appearance. We will typically find goblet cells interspersed. These are typically going to be involved in making mucus. And we will frequently find cilia as well. So pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium is found lining the respiratory tracts, nasal cavity, and bronchi specifically, in its ciliated and goblet cell format. However, we do find non-ciliated versions in the male reproductive tract in portions. In the respiratory tract, those goblet cells are going to secrete mucus, which trap dust, dirt, debris, bacteria, things that don't belong. And then the ciliated cells are going to sweep the bacteria-laden mucus up and out of the respiratory tract in towards the pharynx, where it will be swallowed down the esophagus to be destroyed in the stomach. This is where smoking comes into play. We'll talk about this more with the respiratory system, but when you smoke, especially if you are a heavy smoker, smoking paralyzes the cilia. Now, if it's once, twice, there's plenty of time in between, the cilia and the cells can recover. However, if you are a chronic smoker, especially if you are a heavy chronic smoker, the cilia remain paralyzed, unable to sweep the mucus out, which is why you've heard of the smoker's cough. Yep, that's exactly why. The cilia are not doing their job. They're not moving the mucus up and out, so they have to have a very heavy, aggressive, violent cough in order to move the mucus up and out. And we have some images to go along with this. And then we have transitional epithelium. Transitional epithelium can look stratified squamous, but the cells are round. They kind of bulge a little bit, so they might be more like cuboidal. It is typically 5 to 6 layers thick when relaxed, and if it is stretched, it tends to be about 2 to 3 layers thick. Hence, transitional. As the epithelial tissue stretches, these cells become flatter and thinner, and the layers kind of shuffle down and out, so you get those fewer layers. Which means, where do we find them? This is found predominantly as the epithelial lining of the urinary tract, specifically kidney, ureters, the bladder, and parts of the urethra. Why do we have this tissue there? Well, it stretches, allowing the urinary tract to fill, specifically the bladder. When the tissue space is empty of fluids, they are going to be nice and compact and very square and layered looking. As that space, aka the bladder, fills with fluid, they stretch and become thinner and less layered. And here we have imaging of that. Now, when we talk about glands, these are epithelial tissue. A gland is a cell or an organ that secretes substances for use inside or outside of the body. They are classified as exocrine or endocrine. Basically, these how is the secretion released? And then we talk about them being uni or multicellular, meaning how many cells are involved here. So exocrine glands are going to secrete via ducts, typically to the body surface or to one of the cavities. So the pancreas secretes via a duct into the digestive tract. That makes it an endocrine or exocrine gland. Exo refers to outside, crine is secrete. If we're talking about endocrine glands, endo is within. For my med-term girlies, guys. Med-term guys. Multicellular glands are going to be things like the pancreas, the stomach, sweat glands, salivary glands, mammary glands, sebaceous glands, all those fun guys. Unicellular, that's going to be your goblet cells. Endocrine glands are going to secrete within. They do not typically secrete via a duct, but they typically secrete directly into the bloodstream, and they tend to secrete something known as hormones. Hormones are secreted into the bloodstream, and they are going to travel throughout the body and affect other cells. Examples of these glands are things like the thyroid, thymus, testes, ovaries, pituitary, pineal, adrenal. Pancreas also, though, falls here. Not to confuse things. We'll talk more about endocrine glands when we talk about the endocrine system. Exocrine glands can be very, very simple. The ducts don't branch, or what we refer to as compound, meaning their ducts branch. The exocrine glands are also classified based on the shape of the secretory portion. A tubular secretory portion is typically referred to as tubule. Think of a test tube. And alveoli are more of a round ball. You can have a combination of the two, and that's referred to as tubular alveolar. And because pictures make everything better, here's examples of simple and tubular. Or tubular and alveolar. And they can be simple or branched. Exocrine glands are also sometimes referred to as merocrine, apocrine, or holocrine. Merocrine glands are ones that are going to secrete products by a chemical release. So pancreas, sweat, salivary glands. Apocrines are going to involve pinched off portions of cells, such as your mammary glands. And holocrine is going to be products are secreted by the rupture of the gland cells. These are going to be things like your sebaceous and sebum.